Talking about the new borrowing plan by the Nigerian government, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar strongly criticized President Bola Tinubu's recent 1.77 trillion naira dollar loan approval, calling it bone-crushing and harmful to Nigerians. In a post on his X-handle, Atiku accused the administration of mismanaging loans, prioritizing corruption over developments. He also slammed the National Assembly for approving the loan, saying Nigeria is sinking further into debt. Atiku expressed dismay over the country's return to heavy borrowing, recalling efforts during the Obasanjo administration to clear foreign debt. He warned that Nigeria's ranking as the third most indebted nation to the International Development Association highlights the risk of what he described as a dangerous loan frenzy. Now, joining us on the news to discuss this is a public affairs analyst, Theophilus Akatugba, is right here in our studios. Thank you so much, Mr. Theophilus, for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
So let's look at the 1.77 trillion loan that the Nigerian president has sought approval and gotten. It was ratified by the National Assembly. When you look at the portfolio of the country, we are going to be looking at all the loans now. We're already looking at 130 trillion that is to be paid back. Is there any justification to start with for this loan?
Well, you know, when we talk about issues of money, loans, borrowing, all the economists will be divided based on where they stand, you know, based on which part of the divide they belong to. The political economists will advance very sound argument why they borrow. The political economists of the opposition will also advance the reason why we shouldn't borrow. The reality of the matter is Nigeria economically sound for the development it desires? We want to develop. Do we have the resources for the development we so seek, or we so hold our government to? Because the easiest thing to do in this Nigeria is to just say somebody is corrupt, and then he discredits whatever he's doing. Because corruption is the culture of everyone, including those who are now in opposition. Because when they find themselves there, they don't do any difference. They only use the polity, they use the argument to win the votes, and on getting there, they do exactly the same. People said Buhari borrowed too much, and at the beginning they said this government will not borrow. They've started borrowing. I live in Ghana for many years. It's also the same argument. The government of Akufo-Addo kept borrowing. Many countries of Africa, because of the fact that we are not very productive as a people, and we do not earn enough to be able to match the development that we so seek. And if you have that shortfall, most of the African countries, they resort to borrowing. Even international countries of the West, they borrow. Yeah, but the argument is, why should we borrow? If we do not borrow, what do we do? Do we have the money to run?
But you see that, you know, the Nigerian government or this current administration has been able to, according to it, save monies from fuel subsidies and from the stop or the end to fuel imports. Yeah. So why can't, and we've also seen FAC allocations increased. So why can't we, you know, have those funds being channeled into government expenditure instead of having to borrow again?
But you know that the subsidy was, we were borrowing to pay it. It was not as if we had a stash of money somewhere. No. And every time we borrowed to pay the subsidy, and that mounted the debt. President Buhari borrowed Nigeria to the point of 97% of our money, of our revenue, was going to service those debts. Buhari was borrowing to keep subsidy. Buhari was borrowing to defend the naira. So borrowing has always been the way they do things. What I want to say is this. Now, if the government want to borrow, they should borrow for developmental purpose, so that we don't borrow for consumption. That's the argument. Borrow right. All nations of the world do borrow. Politicians just use the borrowing and the non-borrowing for argument. Atiku is right if you look at it from his own point of view. But to say there are dark consequences and all of that, he is right to the extent of the fact that we're not very productive. So if you borrow for consumption, for recurrent expenditure, at the end of the day, the loan becomes an albatross. We keep paying from resources that we do not have. So he is right to that extent. And the president of the country and the government in power will also argue And when you see the two economists argue, it's like two lawyers arguing and everything look and sound right.
So you've talked about production. You've actually hammered on production. We know that oil production has increased to about 1.8 million barrels per day, and that could be a very good source of FX. Yeah. But then that is just oil.
Yeah.
What other areas do you think Nigeria should be focusing on? We've talked about agriculture, but we've not really seen that spin-off.
First of all, the country needs to put together an enabling environment to galvanize production. What are we doing? What is the country doing? So that people can bring in investment, people can manufacture, people can go back and be comfortable doing business. If activities, even in the real estate sector, hospitality industry, if the cost of running a hotel is brought down minimally and people can if people can visit Nigeria happily and the insecurity is not scaring people with dollars flowing into the country, then you see that there will be revenue for government to be able to pay back its commitments to anybody.
But that's still dependent on government policies also. Because when investors look at a particular economy, they're looking at the body language of that economy. They're looking at the policy of government if it will be favorable. They're looking at the business ecosystem. If it is something they know that if they put their money in, they'll be able to get something. So we are basically talking about economic stability.
Correct. But the positive, the good news is that the international community feel comfortable with Nigeria. If you look at a lot of reviews, only few dissent.
That's on paper.
Just hold on. Some people say that some of the reforms are quite drastic, but they say we're on the right track. Even the IMF says if we are consistent. Now, the positive outlook is dampened by insecurity, is dampened by the voice of Nigerians saying our country is not safe. Everything we say is part of the intelligence gathering. What are we saying about
But most of the companies that left in Nigeria, let's say in the couple of months, have always talked about one thing: FX. No. Which boils down to the policy of government in that line.
No, that's been resolved with the payment of the backlog of 7 billion. Before that time, even the Emirates people said they were leaving the country, they were not going to fly here because they were unable to repatriate their proceeds and their profits. But with the central bank's behavior, having paid the backlog, you can see the Emirates guys are back, and I think that sent some positive signal into the international community.
So basically, you're saying now that Nigerian government should continue, and it seems as though it's almost like a monthly ritual now for this sort of borrowing. So are you invariably saying that the Nigerian government should continue to borrow as long as it's able to channel it into
if government is using the Jimon?
That's the clause.
Jimon came on TV and spoke about something we should do, but that we could borrow ourselves out of poverty. He said that. The point is, what are you using the money that comes into Nigeria? Are we collectively a productive nation? Collectively. The things we do we discuss productivity? Do we discuss solution to our problem? We've been having food crisis. How much food have we produced to double the food supply into the market for food prices to drop? The question is, are we productive?
Are we productive? Yeah. And also talks about accountability, not just, borrowing.
Well, accountability is one thing. Another thing is the vigilance of the citizenry. Sometimes when we are docile or we are participants in corruption, we only pay lip service to the fight against corruption.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Theophilus Akatugba, Public Affairs Analyst. It was nice talking to you.
It's a pleasure.